you looking for a different level of truth about your challenges and struggles? Then be a part of the Yes and podcast, hosted by empowerment strategist and trauma specialist Jennifer Whitacre. Every Wednesday, we challenge conventional thinking on topics like trauma, healing, and so much more. Learn life lessons and great nuggets of wisdom from guests who've moved through their pain and suffering to discover a new purpose in life. Now, here's your host, Jennifer Whitacre.
Hi, everyone. This is Jennifer Whitacre, and you are listening or watching the Yes and podcast. And I'm excited to be back. We took a little break at the beginning of this year, and we have new episodes rolling out again. And today's guest on Yes and is Plano. And Catherine is a transformational mindset coach joining us all the way from Australia. And her mission is to help individuals just like you or me transform and create vibrant, fulfilling lives by tapping into their superpowers, finding the leader within, and drawing on their greatest assets to bring out their fullest possible potential. And that's a pretty high calling in life, Catherine. Welcome to the show. I can't wait to have this conversation with you.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on here too. So tell us just a little bit about yourself in your own words.
Sure. Where do I begin? How far do you want me to go? I've always had a curious mind. Mm-hmm. I've always known there is more to what is always in front of me. And I think it started many moons ago, probably in my teens and then into my 20s. And I went on this, I call it the hero's journey, went through a massive self-discovery through my spiritual path. And I actually worked for a few healing centers and then had my own, and then realized that people were coming to me to help them. And I didn't feel like I was empowering people. I felt like, if anything, they were dependent on me, and I didn't feel right about that. So I went on this quest and studied the brain, and I got into neurolinguistics, neuroscience, brain science, you name it. And fast forward a little bit, I am now doing what I'm doing as a transformational mindset coach, where I help people transform their lives or their career or themselves.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and what you said really, really resonates with me. Like I could feel your words, because I had very similar experiences in my practice where I describe it as if my clients were starting to use me as human allopathic medicine, as if they could come and see me, because I used to be a body worker. And in an hour, they would walk away with no pain, as if I were their Tylenol. That's not how it works. And so I started on my journey in a very similar fashion, like, okay, these people are dependent on me, and this isn't helping. I was enabling. And I'm just wondering, and so I know today we're going to talk a little bit about shadow work, because I know that you and I both do that. So do you mind sharing a little bit about how you got into shadow work and what shadow work is for you? What that means to you?
It's, for me, how I got into it was more so I was curious about it. I'd heard about it, and I did the deep work, because what I found is that I keep having the same patterns that presented in my life, and whether it's relationship or whether it was work, or it didn't matter what it was. And yet the common denominator with all of these events that took place was me. Mm-hmm. So there was no blaming external. There was no blaming my partners, my work, my whatever. It had to be me. And so this is when I went and did the deep work, wondering why I was creating these events over and over again, just different people, different years, different environment. Am I allowed to say the word SHIT?
Yes.
Same
Yeah.
shit.
So,
Okay.
yes.
So it was the same shit all the time. And I was thinking, no, there's got to be something to this. And that's when I did the deep work, where I went within to find out what was going on. And it took me to have a bit of a meltdown. So it was about in 2011 or 12, I had what was then a panic attack, which I didn't know. I actually thought I was dying. But it took me to something to bring me down to my knees. And this is in New York. And when I came back to Melbourne, I literally was bounded in a home for almost 12 months because I was so scared to leave the house. That's when I did all this deep work. And I did a lot of writing, a lot of journaling to help me. Well, I've always done writing and journaling, but it really helped me bring out those dark aspects of me that I didn't want to own. And this is how I really was curious about the shadow. And I did more. And it took me a good 3 years. I wrote a book. It took me 3 years to write the book, but still learning about it, because there's so much to learn about that deeper part of our mind.
Yes, absolutely. And I think what you're saying is such an important aspect that many of us miss, because when we see those patterns, it's so easy to point the finger and say, that's your fault. That's your problem that I'm experiencing this. And it's almost like it's this huge act of, what's an act of courage. And it's almost like an act of rebellion to
Yeah.
own it, because
Yeah, it is.
it's so acceptable. And so I'm just wondering, as you went in and started doing your, deep work and looking at yourself, what happened in your life? Did your friendships and relationships, like, did the people that you hung out with and you had around you, did that start to change and shift, or did you maintain the same relationships?
No, I became very much an introvert and disconnected myself from the external world so that I could do that deep work and go within. And it does take a lot of courage to own up to it, because it's easier to blame the world. It's easier to blame other people. It's easier to blame everything external of you. But once you say, no, this is me projecting into my environment, this is me creating this is me. And absolutely, it is so much more empowering, but it does take the deep work. Has my relationships changed? 100%. If I look at my relationship with my husband, transformed, completely transformed, because now when we get into a bit of I call it, a bit of a tiff, I go, oh, and we can have these conversations. I gave him permission many years ago to say, please, I want to keep doing this deep work, and I want to keep bringing light to those dark aspects of myself that I don't want to own. And I need sometimes somebody external to shine the light on those dark spots. And only then, because I call them blind spots as well, they are our blind spots.
Absolutely.
Only then will I bring them to light. So absolutely, it has improved everything, my relationships, my work environment, everything around me. Those patterns are no longer following me because I have taken ownership, and I've done the deep work, and I've done the shadow work.
Yeah. And I really think that's important to talk about, because so often as we do this work and we really start to step into our own empowerment, then we start to lose friendships that were not healthy for us, or that reiterated those old patterns, that when you have that moment, when you realize, holy shit, this is my circus and these are my monkeys, I can't blame this on anybody else, then you start to let those people drop away. And that can be really uncomfortable. And I see that as a barrier sometimes to people even stepping into this work and even attempting to change or transform. It's almost a conscious choice to continue suffering rather than to heal the self. Do you see that? And how do you address that?
Oh, absolutely. And as you were talking, I just had this quote come into my head, and it was from, I think, Stephen Covey, when he said, "We are the average of the 5 people we hang around with."
Yes.
And that was interesting because from a projection point of view, how
Mhm.
is it when I had a look at my group of friends,
Mhm.
I thought to myself, these are all aspects of me.
Mhm.
And so for me it was really interesting, because once I realized that, going back to what we're talking about, absolutely some of these friendships dropped off because I thought, I no longer need to do this to myself anymore. These
Mhm.
relationships no longer serve me.
Right.
And it was really about integrating it as well. So when you were talking, I'm really sorry, it just
Mhm.
that quote came into my mind.
Yeah, I think that's Jim Rohn.
Oh, is it Jim Rohn?
I think
Yes.
it's Rohn that said that. Yeah,
Yes, you're
I
right.
think
I think
so.
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Yep.
Yes. So
It's
going back to your question,
yeah.
sorry, because
Oh, yeah. No, I just think it's really important to talk about because I feel like that's what I see with people sometimes is they'll start to experiment a little bit with shadow work, or they'll start to go through the questions, or as soon as they start into it and it starts to bring up conflict in their relationships, then they stop because the conflict in the relationship is uncomfortable. So it's like a conscious choice to stay in their suffering rather than continue with their own healing, their own personal healing and own personal growth. And I was just wondering how you address that with people,
yeah,
with the clients that you work with.
yeah. I mean, it's the deep work is the hard work, and
Mm-hmm.
but then once you keep at it, you're chipping away at it. It becomes the easy work, and it's almost like bit of the devil. People are more comfortable staying
Mm-hmm.
with a bad relationship, or staying in a bad with in a bad job, or a bad career, or a bad whatever that may be, because it's once again there. It's a knowing for them. They're comfortable. For them to step outside of that,
Mm-hmm.
it's it can be quite confronting. Like you said, it can be quite scary. And to own your shadow is the other thing. It's like you can't blame anybody else. Now you're actually completely accountable and responsible. And some people don't want that. That's too
Exactly.
much for the little shoulders to carry.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll always deny, no, 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 that is not me. That
Mm-hmm.
is not me. And sometimes I'll hold a mirror up and I go, but if everything around you is a mirror, a reflection of you,
Mm-hmm.
right? What is this relationship? So they'll sit on one side of the chair and I'll sit on the other side of the chair and I'll grab the mirror and I go, if this is you, if this is, let me play, name the mirror, the person, what aspects of that individual can you connect with? What aspects of that individual can you say that, yes, I created that? And it takes a lot of courage, like you were
Mm-hmm.
saying before, to actually
Yeah.
say, actually, no, I have created it. I've created this because I actually don't like that aspect of myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Exactly.
when this presents, it's like I need to, and the shadow works in two ways. People think it's always the negative. It's not. It
Mm-mm.
can be as simple as I look at you and go, you're amazing. Look at your business. You're thriving and you're really putting yourself out there. That is the shadow, because
Mm-hmm.
that is an aspect of myself that I am not owning, because I am saying, this is my shadow saying, Catherine, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to own to
Mm-hmm.
be successful.
Yes. Yes. And I think we had that conversation before we started recording when I apologized for when I was on your show a few years ago. My perception of
Mm,
that and your perception of that are two totally different things. So
absolutely.
yeah, because that was the first podcast I was ever on. And like, there's part of me that just really wants to bury my head in the sand and say, oh, please don't go look at that one.
And if I was sitting with you and I would say, but if you were to look at that once again, right, it's the lens that we have, and
Yes,
we were having that conversation. We are our
absolutely.
own worst critic, right? And
Yes.
so when we and not that I did the same thing not that long ago, there was a video and I looked at the video and I went, oh, because in this
Yeah.
talk, in my mind, I was trying to get so perfect
Mm-hmm.
that I ended up sounding like a bit of a robot. And so I know that when I looked at it again, I was being hard and I could hear this critic.
Mm-hmm.
And then I actually, because, with the brain, they say that you've got to have, like with every negative, you almost have to have 7 positives to actually outweigh. And we're talking this is same with the shadow work. If you think about the shadow, when you look at, if we were to say, put a torch up, right? The closer, the more light we we lean into, the more we go towards light, the bigger the shadow comes, right?
Yes.
And it is. And so that's why sometimes people will back off, you know, they don't want to do that work. So for me, it's about going in there, and I had to keep watching this video with then a loving kindness, compassion, like completely the opposite. And now when I look at it, I see it with different eyes. So this would be for you. If you were to go back to that podcast and to listen with your heart, because, and with the, you know, the understanding that this was your first one. Do you realize how much courage this took? Yeah.
Oh, I was nervous. I was all get out that day. I paced the floor. I was so nervous.
We all do. We all do. And that's normal. And as long as we can say, and I think that that's really important for all of us, and to stand in our truth and stand in our light, that we are not perfect. We are going to get it wrong. And we also get nervous. People seem to think that, you know, oh, Catherine, you've been doing this work for 25 years. You should, you know, have it all together. I so don't have my shit together. I'm still getting in my way. And even like 2 years ago, you know, I had this conversation with my husband, and I realized that I was getting in my way. This is constantly getting in my way. My saboteur was popping up and getting in my way. And I realized I had this fear of success.
Yes.
It doesn't matter. This work, you're never done. This work is ongoing. Yes.
And that is so important. I mean, you said so many important things in there, you know, and talk about, you know, like the closer you get to the light. Is it Carl Jung who said, the brighter the light, the darker the shadow? Yes. And that is so, so true. I mean, you have this bright light, and of course we're going to have this long, dark shadow behind us, the brighter the light. And by not embracing our shadow, we're doing ourselves a disservice, because that's part of us. And you mentioned the saboteur. The saboteur is one of the archetypes that is part of the survival family. The survival family is the saboteur, the victim, the prostitute, and the child. Everybody on the planet has those 4 archetypes. That's those are the archetypes that we have to contend with in our lifetime. We have to butt up against our inner child. We have to butt up against our inner saboteur, our inner victim, and our inner prostitute. And these are not meant to be taken literally. You have to speak the language of symbology to truly understand this. But if we don't face these aspects of ourselves, every one of us, then we will never develop a healthy self-worth and self-esteem, because they're here to help us develop our self-esteem. And
that's right.
So important to go in and face them.
Absolutely. And I always look at that, and you know, for me, when I did a bit of that work, is it
Carolyn Mace?
Yeah. I remember that work, and I remember looking into it, and I was thinking at the time, I was like, oh, I'm not a prostitute, I'm not a victim. Saboteur could relate to. But it is about, how do we, in what part of our life are these archetypes playing out? And when you do that work, I mean, she's got this great book. I can't remember the book, but it is it's a really big book, and there's some questions that you can go through. But when you actually start unpacking it, you can see these archetypes play out. Yeah. And it's only when we own them that we can go, oh, okay. And they all have a purpose. Yes. Yeah. Even our shadow. I mean, everything, our saboteur, our shadow, it all has a purpose.
Right. Right. I believe it's how our higher self communicates with us. I a lot of times use the term higher self. Some people say soul, some people say spirit, some people say universe, some people say God. You know, all my relations.
Greater mind.
Yeah, greater mind, higher intelligence, whatever you call it. It's that quiet little voice. It's that voice of wisdom. It's very quiet. It's not loud. It's not the ego, because the ego tends to get really loud. And the ego drowns out that little voice. So yeah, that's the one that comes through, and it speaks in the language of symbology.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's why it's really important to meditate. I mean, not this morning, but most mornings. I mean, this morning I did get up at 4 o'clock, but I got myself ready because it's 6:22 in the morning here. But every morning I get up at 4 o'clock and I meditate. And like you said, for us to be able to connect with the higher self, the greater mind, and really understand, to be able to unify all aspects of ourselves, we must be in a state of stillness.
Yes.
For us to be able to merge and integrate all aspects. And I think that this whole thing that's taking shape all over the world is a calling for us to go within and do the deep work and do the shadow work and sit with self.
Yes.
And go in and do that inner dialogue or that inner inquiry. You know, set an intention or go into a meditation with a question, whatever that may be.
Right. I couldn't agree more. I've been seeing this, I don't know, like in my whole life, if I've ever seen the hand of the divine in anything, I swear it's this virus.
I agree.
I just can't get my head around how humans could come together in a conspiracy to stop the entire world, because countries that don't get along, that don't communicate, have come to a complete halt. So there's something really divine, and I see the same thing that you're talking about, where it's almost like that higher part of us, or that higher aspect, is asking us to go within, to be quiet, to go within. And here in the United States, one thing I'm noticing, I can't say that it's across the board because I don't follow the news in every little tiny part of the United States, but as we start to reopen, as the reopening rolls out, the weather starts coming in. And I know, like, first day of phase 2 reopening where I live, like, we had massive thunderstorms, record rainfalls, tornadoes on the commute home on day 1. Like, it was our busiest day in 2 months on the road. And so there were tornadoes and heavy rains, floods, all of that. And I'm like, somebody's saying, go back to your room. You came out too soon. And it's not just where I am, it's happening in other places too. And, you know, and is it a stretch? I don't know. Am I putting meaning where there's not meaning? I don't know. It just seems, you know, it seems almost too coincidental. Yeah. And
we've had the same too. We've had some crazy winds and rains, and it was and you know, it's I mean, I do call it divine intervention, because if I have a look at it, we've asked for this. If I look at it, we've been asking to slow down because everything was going fast, and I also run a podcast, as you know. Every person I've been speaking to over the years, it's like, we're going so fast, we're going too fast, there's been burnout, blah, blah, blah. I wish I would slow down. I wish I could spend more time with my family. Boom, it's happening.
Yes.
We've been fighting for the improvement of our environment and the earth and so forth. Boom, have a look. We are now, the planet is healing.
Yes, yes. And so are we, if we let ourselves. But we have to allow that healing.
Yes. No, I agree. And it's not, and I'm also conscious about, you know, that everyone will react and respond differently to this whole situation. We can't control externally. That's the other thing. Like when we're talking about doing the deep work, you can't control other people. And the only thing we can control is ourselves. And so I remember there's this one individual that I did some work with, and it was about their partner, and all they did was complain about their partner and blame their partner, and boom, 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 boom. And, you know, the same story that maybe some of us have experienced. I know that I've experienced it myself. And it's not till I said, okay, just for the next 21 days, just think of one good thing that you could focus on this person, one good thing. Because when we think about it, when we first get involved in a relationship and we first start in a new job, whatever that may be, we, you know, I say this about my son and my husband. When I first met my husband, I thought the sun was shining out of his crown chakra, you know, and he couldn't do anything wrong at all. And it wasn't till over a period of time that little things started annoying me, and then I started focusing on those little things, and those little things became bigger things, and then it was just like I was blinded by this shadow of what I projected onto my partner.
Yes.
And it wasn't until I started going, okay, this is me now projecting, so let's turn this around. What aspects of my life, and I'm not owning these, and when you've got to really chunk up, because it might not be that specific, but by doing that work and shifting the lens a little bit, you can start seeing that person in a different light, in the light.
Yes.
And so for all of us, you know, even in this situation when we can't control the external, what we can do, and I'm a bit like you, I won't watch the news, I won't read the paper, I don't want to be influenced, because I'm in a bubble of joy, being a big introvert. So for me, I'm enjoying it. But for all of us, if we looked at, or even if we asked this question, how did I create this, right? And what did I ask for to receive this? So much more empowering than blaming.
Exactly. Yeah. And I've been saying the same thing. People have been complaining about society. They've been complaining about their lives. They've been complaining about the world. What a perfect opportunity to change it and do something about it.
True. Exactly.
Yeah,
And it is, what can we do about it?
Right.
Rather than saying that we can't do anything about it.
Right. And, you know, and on the larger macro scale, I believe we really need our governments on board with that attitude. And I just don't think that's the case around the world. I should know it certainly is not in my country, where the government's not on board with how can we improve this? How can we make sure that some of our essential workers have some more solid protections in place in case this ever happens again? Or what can we do to help them before the second wave and the third wave hit? And that's just not happening. So without the governments involved, you know, it's like, you know, okay, it's even more important for us to do our individual work, because that's how we really change the world. If we all change ourselves, the whole world's going to change.
That's right.
Yeah.
I believe that. I believe that from, if we're talking about ascension, if we want other people to rise and ascend, we need to be leading by example. And by being, and that's the internal work. And through, if there's, you know, there's been all of this evidence as well. Like I think it was in San Francisco, and I can't remember the year, and I can't even remember the research around it. But I remember that when there was a mass, and we're talking about, you know, lots of people, hundreds and hundreds of people, let's say even thousands of people, that aggregated and did this meditation. To improve the environment, to improve, because I think there was a lot of crime at the time, and it might have been in the 80s off the top of my head. But what they did is, just from doing that inner work and just lifting their vibration, projecting this love and this kindness and compassion externally, that apparently the crime dropped by, you know, a very big percentage. So if we look at that, it is very much that this is what we must do. It's calling for us to go within and do that deep work, for us to project that love, project that light, instead of saying, you know, pointing the fingers at the government. And, you know, because in different countries are responding, reacting differently. There's some countries that don't practice the social distancing, even in Europe, there's some of them, you know, but once again, it's I think people get too caught up in what, you know, whether it's conspiracy, whether what other countries are doing. What we should be doing, just going within and doing that deep work to bring that light, to rise the vibration or raise the vibration. And only then, once we project that love into our government, and will help evoke exactly what we want out of our environment. But it starts with us.
Yes. And those experiments with meditation and crime have happened in multiple cities, not just one. So there are multiple experiments like that have happened. And as this pandemic started, I can't remember the date. It was in early April, like April 5th or 8th or 10th or something like that. There was a mass global meditation. And I know in my time zone, it was at night, like 10:45 that night. Whoever does the recording of the Schumann resonance of the earth, it actually, whenever that mass global meditation happened, it showed up on the Schumann resonance, which is the vibration or the, you know, of the earth.
I remember that actually. That was when the portals opened. But I do remember that, because I remember that it was a weekend for us, and I think it was around 4th and 5th of April.
Yeah, something like that. I can't remember what day actually it happened, but it did actually record on the Schumann resonance, which I thought was quite remarkable, because you can see, you know, like they're constantly monitoring this resonance of the earth, and you know that's pretty powerful.
It
And
is. And how do we make that mainstream?
right, right. And so, and it's becoming more mainstream. It really is. It's becoming more mainstream. A lot of people are maintaining their sanity right now while we're staying at home or in quarantine through meditation and practices of mindfulness. So it's becoming more and more popular. And I want to circle back because whenever you introduced yourself, you said that you embarked on a hero's journey. So I'm kind of changing topics a little bit, but not really. Can you talk a little bit about what the hero's journey is to you, and
Sure.
what, you know, how did you go through the hero's journey? Like, what did that look? What is it, and what did it look like for you?
Yeah, sure. So for me, it's like, and I look at it, I mean, I don't know if you're into tarot, but if you have a look at the tarot cards, the hero's journey, the fool that jumps out into the void, not knowing where they're going to land. And if you have a look at the card itself, the background shows that there's mountains, and there are high mountains, there are low mountains, and sometimes we have to climb up really high and we get to the top and then we fall down. And really, that's the hero's journey. It's like we are constantly going through, you know, those ups and downs in life. And sometimes we will cross paths with, you know, whether you call it a dragon or whether it's, you know, another individual. In this case for me, it was like, as I was sharing with you, it's like, I'm thinking, for me, I was like, oh, this is a new beginning. I'm jumping out into the void, starting my life all over again, which I've done many times. And so, and then I will go on my journey, having fun and loving life. And then all of a sudden I trip over. And this is when I'm presented by, and this is once again, if we go back to the shadow, we're projecting this individual who I thought might have been my mentor or whatever that may be, ended up having a relationship with that person and ended up hurting. Right. So then I go, and, you know, the hero's journey is going deep into that unconscious. It's like doing that deep work and hiding and, you know, being the victim. If we're looking at the archetypes as well, being the victim, feeling sorry for myself and whatever that may be. And then once you've done all that deep work, then there's this essence of, I can get through this and I can start rising again. So you're coming through and then you start all over again. It's just like everything works in circles, and it's a circle of life, right?
Yeah.
So we're going through our adventures. We're going to come across our foes, our pain, our disasters, our whatever you want to call them, our chaos, you know, and then we go and, you know, play this whole victim mentality and whatever that may be, feeling sorry for ourselves and blaming the world until we come back out again. So for me, it's been, and as I was saying at the start, I noticed these patterns that were repeating over and over and over again. So for me, this is when I really discovered that for me, that in the struggles, and I'm sure that's with everyone, when we struggle, when we find those dark moments, it's when, and they don't last for long, because I always used to say to myself, this too shall pass. Every time, because I had them over and over again. When I have these struggle moments, I looked at these moments as I've matured in life, that I looked at those moments as they're not a struggle. They're actually a very blissful and a blissful experience. And if I can find light within that struggle, I can move across much quicker. Sometimes in the hero's journey, sometimes when we look at, people get stuck. And I know some people that get stuck in the struggle. So and I talk about this in one of my TEDx talks, that I had a client for 8 years who hung on to her divorce. 8 years.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we keep ourselves stuck because we do. We're not, because you're not stuck.
Yeah.
We decide to stay there.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So for me, it's about now when it happens, the quicker I can get through this, and the quicker when these struggles or these obstacles or these, to me, I look at these as a way forward. They're actually a way forward. They're not there to stop me. So now the hero's journey goes really quickly. It's not, I don't get stuck in any areas of my life.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Fantastic. And you've talked a lot about, patterns. And I think it's important to go a little bit deeper into some of the patterns, because so many of us are blind to our own patterns. And I can imagine that maybe some of the listeners are going, gosh, how do you figure out what your patterns are? And so
Sure.
how do you actually start becoming aware? And I admit I have a hard time explaining this to people because my whole life I've always had some level of awareness. So it's like trying to, if somebody really lacks awareness, I have a hard time explaining that. I really do.
Okay. So some patterns for me, like you'd share, patterns would be that I end up in relationships where I end up with a broken heart.
Mm-hmm.
So this was a repeating pattern. So why is it that my partners or partners at the time were unfaithful all the time? So that was one pattern. So why is this constantly repeating, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it was, why are people taking advantage of me? And this was happening all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why is it that people are constantly taking me for granted? So there was another pattern.
Mm-hmm.
A work pattern was, why is it that, for example, I was constantly given work, and because I'm a hard worker, I'm a workaholic, and because I get things done, it's like it's constantly, they're giving me more. So every role that I played over and over again, it's like they constantly give me lots of work.
Mm-hmm.
And this was an ongoing pattern to the point where I was overwhelmed all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So the patterns are, what are you experiencing over and over again? So broken heart, people taking, being a victim, people taking advantage of me, or whether it was work, feeling, overwhelmed all the time. These are patterns.
Mm-hmm.
So once we can identify these patterns, and what helps for me is writing them down. So this is journaling for me is the biggest part, because then you get them out of your head.
Yeah.
And, once you get it out of your head, it's so much easier to make sense of it.
Yeah.
But if we keep it in our head, it goes from side to side, and we're constantly, playing like, well, isn't it? Or is it my imagination? We can't make sense of it. Mm-hmm. So writing it down for me was, it helped me bring to light these patterns. It could be as simple as, what are my patterns in my life? And I do it every 7 years. So what was a pattern from the time I was born right up to the age of 7? Well, I probably can't remember that far. Pattern from 7 to 14. And when you start doing this, you can start seeing these, what was the headline every 7 years? What was that story for you every 7 years? You'll start seeing a pattern.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in order to do this work, it really requires us to turn off the TV and to stop constantly entertaining that narrative, that ego, that mind, the mind that thinks it's in control.
Yes.
So
yes.
Because we're constantly entertaining that, we constantly have earbuds in, listening to music, listening to audiobooks, listening to podcasts, and I'm a podcaster. And so, and at some point, I hope you turn off the darn podcast and go within and start to explore. And you've said a few times, that you've had to disconnect from the world. And that's been my experience, where I've really had to just separate myself and not go out into the world as often so I can go within. And I really think these are huge missing links that aren't emphasized enough. They truly aren't.
Yep. I agree, totally agree. And this is why I think this is really important for all of us. We should take this opportunity, because I do call it an opportunity, to do that. Exactly that. Go within, do some journaling. And don't get me wrong, like when you were saying about the podcast, I agree. But sometimes listening to podcasts, what I find, and some of the feedback that you'll get and everybody gets, it's like sometimes they hear a conversation like this and they'll go, I am normal. There's actually other people that go through this, or there's actually other people that think this way about themselves.
Yeah.
So it does give you an inspiration.
Exactly.
Or motivation.
Exactly. Yeah. And my deepest hope for people is that whenever they get those, I'm not alone, whenever you get that felt sense in your body, that's a little aha moment. It's not just a thought. A realization has a felt sense to it, or an aha moment has that feeling. When you get that feeling, that's your cue. Maybe when that podcast is over, take some alone time and go further into whatever that topic was that you felt in your body. Not just thought about, not just heard, but you felt it, like it landed.
I love the fact that you say
Mm-hmm.
that, because I think that also this whole calling is to go within, is the heart. I
Mm-hmm.
find that it is really doing and everything. When we come from a place of love, we can be so much more compassionate. And this is going back to, if we go back to the podcast when we first met, or even the video that I was talking about, when we go in there with the place from the heart or love, it's so different. So, for example, when we talk about our inner critic, I have a photo of me when I was 18 months old. And I've got this curly hair and I'm sitting on my bike. And when I hear the inner critic, I will just look at this photo because it's a visual thing. And when we're thinking about that deeper part of our unconscious mind, it does speak the language of pictures. Like you said, the symbols, it's the pictures. As soon as you look at this photo, and it's a quick question, Catherine, would you speak to that little girl like that? The answer is always no.
Right.
Always no. So this whole experience right now, whatever you want to call it, crisis, pandemic, whatever, I call it, it's an opportunity for us to do that work and sit in silence. Not have the TV on, I don't watch TV anyway. I don't watch the news. If anything, I watch Gaia. I love educating my mind and keeping myself as positive as possible.
Yeah. And it really is important to pay attention to what we consume. And that's not just eat. What we consume with all of our senses, not just the gustatory ones, what we consume, what we smell, what we hear, what we see, what we feel, that's super important. And that kind of segues into a conversation about boundaries, because I believe boundaries are for us. My boundaries are for me. Like, you don't know my boundaries. So if you cross a boundary, how unfair is it for me to say, well, you just offended me? You're like, well, how the hell did I know? You don't know what my boundaries are. So my boundaries are for me. And if you cross one of my boundaries, I would hope that I would be compassionate and kind enough to respond to that in a way to reestablish the boundary in a healthy way without getting snappish or, being a jerk and putting it on you and making it your fault that you crossed a boundary you didn't even know existed.
Yeah,
So
and boundaries is a big one for me too.
I think that's a huge part of the shadow work too, is learning to establish boundaries and maintain those healthy boundaries.
That's right. It's true. And being, I am into astrology and I study it, but being a triple water, I have no boundaries. For me, it's like I need a container. And I know for me, it's like, I want to help the world. I want to change the world. And I don't feel comfortable saying no.
Yeah.
And so for me, it takes a lot of work to actually say to myself that every time you say yes to somebody else, you're actually saying no to you. And so I've had to become really creative in creating these boundaries. And so because I feel uncomfortable saying no, I will say, can I get back to you? Or right at this moment, I have these projects I'm working on. Can we talk about in a month's time or 6 weeks' time? Is there somebody else that you could consider? So I've learned to create boundaries without saying no, because I know that no, and I had a coach who actually coached me on that, say, just say no. And I'm like, I actually can't. You can't. I felt like I was pushing up my boundaries, making me say or do something that is not natural to me. But then when I was able to say it in a different way and understand that I'm actually, including myself in the decision making, it's because the ego, for example, and I guess too, it's like our ego, for me, and my husband will call it squirrel. I have a squirrel moment. I'll have somebody, for example, they'll come and say, hey, Catherine, do you want to do this project with me? And I'm like, that sounds excited. It's like, he goes, oh, great. You're going to help change the world and it's going to help promote you and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh, once again, if I look at it, it plays two ways. The ego is getting all lit up like a Christmas tree, and the shadows is also saying, hang on, these are these aspects that maybe you need to own or look into, not necessarily somebody else. And so for me, to keep me on track with my boundaries as well, this links all back to boundaries, is I have a vision board. that sits in front of me right now in front of me. And so when I have these squirrel moments, I look at my vision board and say, Catherine, is it aligned with what you want to create for yourself this year? And if the answer is no, then I'll have to, decline. But yeah, they're my squirrel moments. We all have them. When there's something bright and shiny somewhere else, we go, oh, let's do that.
Yes, exactly. And brilliant. And I hope the listeners out there are really listening to what Catherine's saying, because already now twice you've talked about things that you have in your room that you have placed there purposely as reminders to keep your mind on track where you want it to be, instead of letting that ego narrator mind take you where it thinks you should go. Because whenever that narrative in our mind that narrates life for us, that inner judge, that inner critic, which is more attached to the ego and the personality, not the subconscious or unconscious, that will, oh my gosh, take us off the rails. And it's like the dictator within.
Yes. Yeah. And we have to use our tools, because we are living in this physical reality, and sometimes we need physical things to keep us anchored to what we want to create.
Yes. And it's possible. And I think it was Einstein who said something to the effect of that the mind is a better servant than master. And it is possible to take that ego and have it work for us and work with us more as the servant of that higher mind rather than the dictator over it. It's kind of like that rolling in hell versus serving in heaven sort of concept.
Yeah, I know. And I think it's, for me over time with the ego, I mean, we need the ego. And I remember not that long ago, I wrote an article about the ego. Your ego is not your amigo kind of thing. It's like, people, because the ego, it's almost, what we, I call it the mediator between the conscious and the unconscious. And once upon a time, I remember, and I'm trying to think of it, I think it might have been Anita Moorjani or someone like that who said, you being, because I'm very much and she didn't say that I was a doormat, but it was because I was a people pleaser, and I still am. She was saying, for me, I need to invest time with my ego, which before I was like, oh, that, I don't want to invest in ego. It was like, that's not spiritual. That's not, that's to me, I could not relate to it. But once again, that was my whole shadow playing out, and I used to, this is another pattern. It was interesting how every time I would, go and see speakers, or I would be in corporate environments, and I would say the words, oh, they're egotistic. Oh, they're egotistic. I would never do that. Would never say that. Would never be like that. That was me projecting. Yeah. So I've had to own my ego and integrate and dance with my ego.
Yep. That's another thing I feel. Been there, done that too. Yes. And so when it comes to like setting boundaries with ourselves and having this relationship with the ego, I think it's really important to go a little bit further into why this is important, because something I'd like to add here is I really believe that this soul aspect to ourselves, this higher self, is where we gain our energy or our empowerment. And empowerment, and I do want to clarify what I mean by that. When I say empowerment, like where our power comes from within. And whenever I say empowerment or that power within, I'm not meaning like power over anything in the world around us. I'm talking about power as in charging our batteries. And every time we get an intuitive hit and we let the ego override that intuitive hit, AKA you can't say no to people, because you're overriding that, or you're not focused on what you truly want, and you get attracted by the squirrel moment, that eats away at our energy, and it depletes our batteries and it drains our batteries. And we even have this language about us, and I think we need to pay attention more to our language. Sometimes we're around people and we're like, oh my gosh, I love her, but she drains me. Every time I'm around her, I just feel drained. Right there, that somebody's draining your energy. And when we don't form a healthy relationship with our shadow and listen to that symbolic language that comes from it and tries to navigate, then we don't have any currency in our energetic system, which is kind of like, I call it the immune system for our psyche, because we do have an energetic immune system. And if that is depleted chronically, it's going to start drawing energy from our cellular tissue. And
So true.
eventually the body is going to break down, and we're going to develop a chronic issue, a chronic illness, a chronic disease, even a diagnosable. I am not a big fan of diagnosing mental illness with different labels. And at the same time, that's the model we have in America. And the more depleted you are, the more likely you are to be labeled with like an autoimmune disease or cardiovascular disease or diabetes or PTSD or bipolar or anything that you can find in the DSM. And so I'm just wondering, this is my take on it. Can you add to it or give me your take on it?
Yeah, no, what you were saying just then, to words carry vibration and energy. And so when we start being more mindful and present and listening to the words, that gives us a hint as to what is going on at the unconscious level.
Yes.
And so, quite often, and I know that I used to catch myself out, oh, this meeting is driving me crazy. Or this, whatever, this lady is a pain in the butt. All of these sayings that I used to say. And then I'd wonder, like, simple as like, I've got this all back, the bottom of my spine. Like, I was getting it quite often, like a pain in my, the very bottom. I call it my tail.
Yeah, tailbone.
And and then it was like, but if you listen to the words and they carry vibration, you actually create it. We manifest it in our physical body. So when we listen to the words that we're using, and we can change them quickly. And this is what I started doing, is I started changing my language, because when there's so much emotion involved in the words that we use, we actually attract it towards us like a magnet. We attract that very, there's some certain words I won't even use, because I know it carries a vibration. And I don't want that vibration anywhere near me.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like you were saying, the labels, people have labels. Absolutely. Oh, you've got Asperger's, and that person's going to go home and Google everything about Asperger's. And of course, if they can connect to any aspect of that, they've got Asperger's. And the more they talk about it and the more they believe it and the more emotions they invest in it, the more they are going to create exactly that, manifest exactly that, whatever you want to call it.
Yes, exactly. I agree. And I also feel like this is incredibly important, and because I feel like it's a kind of like a double-edged sword sometimes, because it can be super important whenever we're holding something in that's creating shame or guilt or humiliation that we don't want the rest of the world to see. It can be really important to name some of those things. So sometimes labels can be important. So can you talk about, how do you know the difference? How do you know when to say no and when to name it? Because both are important and it's situational.
Yeah, I agree with you. And
yeah, so, right?
I know we label it because it's either something that we were told, whether it's shame. Right? Let's say, like, we label. Yes, I label things. So, for example, my inner critic. When I work with my inner critic, the only way that I was able to work with my inner critic was give it a name, and it's Roger. So, for anyone that's heard about my story, they know it's Roger. Don't ask me why Roger, but it just came out as Roger. So, was as a way to separate myself with my inner critic, to do the work, the deep work. Labeling works, absolutely. When it comes to emotion, for me, and this is for me only, from my own experience doing my own deep work, when I label it as shame or anger or whatever that may be, it becomes that. But when I actually then do the work where it's an emotion, and I go, okay, it's just a feeling, and not labeling it, I find from my experience, it's easier to work with. And what is that? Because there's always a feeling, and that feeling is, there's always a story behind that, So whatever that emotion you're feeling, what's the story behind that? And when I can connect with the story, I can work with it. But if I start labeling it as shame or anger, whatever that may be, or that's anger, I find that it's almost like manifests sometimes in my physical body, because I've carried it for such a long time. Because if we have a look at the bodies that we have a spiritual body, we have a mental body, emotional body, and a physical body. What we think, we actually, it dribbles, it comes into the other aspects of our body, and with enough emotion, it goes into our physical body. Our emotion fuels our thoughts, which then becomes, when people say, Catherine, I can't believe I've been doing all this work with you, and I thought I was done with it, and my shit comes up. I'm like, no, when it's in your body, it's on its way out, because you are actually working through it and you're releasing it. So labeling does work, absolutely. But sometimes, from my experience working with emotions, labeling those can sometimes, even with clients, keeps them stuck in that emotion. So sometimes I use the analogy of, let's not label it. What is the story behind this feeling? And let's get into that story.
Yeah, and then you can start to question it, and look for holes in the story, because we get attached to the story we tell ourselves, and the story we tell ourselves is usually the worst possible scenario for us. It's what holds us personally in the worst light. And we latch on to that. And so it's a form of catastrophizing. And our brains are hardwired to do that. It's part of our survival mechanism. The problem is, we're not being chased by saber-toothed tigers anymore. We are at the top of the food chain, and the danger in the world, a lot of it's imagined. So we create these imaginary stories, and we have to challenge ourselves to look beyond it. And I wanted to add what you were saying about naming, especially with emotions. I encourage my clients to do exactly what you were saying, to put distance between themselves and the emotion. Instead of saying, I'm angry, say, I'm feeling anger, or I'm experiencing anger. So keep that arm's length. It's okay to name it and acknowledge that you're experiencing anger, but you don't have to be the anger. And saying I am angry is, am is a form of the word be.
Yes, love it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And sometimes I get them to give it a name. So whatever that emotion is, give it a name. And it's interesting how sometimes it might be a mother or the father or grandparent. It's really interesting, like when they name it, it's okay. So what
and you're getting to the root. As soon as they give it that name, you have tendrils to the root.
That's it. That's
perfect.
So absolutely separate yourself with it. Absolutely. Whatever you can call it, whatever emotion you're going through. It's, I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling sad right now. I'm feeling, pissed off, whatever that may be. I'm feeling hurt.
Yes.
Put it on the other side of the chair. And it could, I always use this analogy. If there was you and this other person, put them on the other chair and give it a name. When you give it a name, not the emotion, but a name, it's really, that's when the stories come out.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Thank you. So we're getting close to an hour, not quite. And I would like to hear a little bit about your book called Getting to the Heart of the Matter. And I know you said it took you 3 years to write it. That's quite a journey.
It took me
I haven't written mine yet.
It took me
I have chapters all over the place. Nothing flows.
And that's okay. I think it's like, you've got to do what's right for you and how it works for you. And I think that the more research we do, or how this is how you should write a book, I think it's going to be different for everybody from my experience. Getting to the heart of the matter is when I did all that deep work. So I was doing all that research because I actually had a meltdown. I call it a meltdown. And it was the best, I call it the best thing that I've experienced because I was able to do it. So basically it's like a workbook, and it's a beautiful book. It's very colorful. It's beautiful, but it's actually a workbook. It's not a book that you read. It's a book that you would pick up and do a bit at a time. I would always say, do one chapter or one activity once a week, because it takes time to integrate. When you do work, and if you're doing, and I know for myself, when I've sat through some courses, if there's too much content, you can't integrate it. But when it's kind of drip fed a little bit at a time, It's easy, but it's got heaps of tools in there that I've helped me pull out of my my dark my cave. I used to call it my cave, and I still go in my cave every now and then. I call it my man cave, because I need to go in there. But it is if for those that are interested in doing the deep work, the book is beautiful, if I may say so myself, because it is absolutely. It's not just all content. It's every page is pictures, which we know is what stimulates the unconscious mind, and it's what speaks to us. So it's not just the words, it's the pictures in the book that will speak to you.
Wonderful. Oh, that's fantastic. And what do you have to say to people who are afraid of shadow work? They fear it because they hear shadow work and they think it's all like dark and horror movie type stuff and evil and bad and, like the dark forces. I think that's a common misconception about shadow work. I think there's, at least in America, that's what I run into a lot. So what would you say to people who are afraid of shadow work because they're afraid it's like that dark wolf that lives within,
It's time to bring light to our shadow. It's time to love our shadow. It's time to integrate our shadow. And there's one thing I used to say to my son all the time when he was little. We have a dark wolf and we have a white wolf, and it depends which one we feed to which one becomes more evident, more powerful, and more present. And so I think that we can't go towards, you can't ignore the shadow, because we are part of a dichotomy, whether it's male, female, positive, negative, that exists. We need to integrate those and be right in the center and be okay with both. And if we can't do that, the shadow, we will constantly have these patterns and these problems and these struggles. So the quicker we integrate our shadow and do the work, the better our lives will be.
Yeah.
The quicker that the things that we want in our life will present.
Yes. Yeah. And I believe that those parts of us that we ignore act out the same way that a child who is neglected will act out after chronic neglect. So if you continue to ignore these aspects of yourselves, the longer time goes and, you get to middle age and you get that midlife crisis, like these things are acting out because you've ignored them for so long. Maybe it's time to pay attention because they're screaming at you. They're screaming. And that's what creates the suffering. Those parts that we ignore create suffering inside of us.
Absolutely. And it will constantly be nagging like a child that, you're like in your nightgown or your dress or whatever. It's like, Mom, if we don't pay attention.
Yes, exactly. So Catherine, tell us just a little bit about your Rise and Thrive Coaching Academy.
Sure. So it's going to sound funny because it took me 3 years took us 3 years to put it all together. And there must be a 3-year pat for me. I am a 3-time convincer, funnily enough. The Rise and Thrive Coaching Academy is a coaching academy that basically is, it's based on research, based on psychotherapy, psychology, brain science, neuroscience, neurolinguistics, you name it, because everything that I do is about transformation. So the difference for us is that this coaching academy also provides with business in a box, if you'd like to call it business in a box. Because when I started my journey, I didn't have contracts, proposals, or anything like that. So this is a coaching program provides the whole business in the box. Plus, the 2 best ways to promote yourself is through writing and speaking. And they are also a part of our advanced modules. Because I know for myself, even though I used to write and journal for many years, to actually put it out there is a big difference than writing it into. And so I always talk about how hard it was. I was afraid. What will people think? All of these things. I was getting in my own way. And so speaking and writing are 2 main ways to expose and stand in your truth and shine. Because if you've got a message and you do want to, make a difference in the world or raise the vibration of the planet or whatever that may be for you, whatever your why is, This is all a part of the Rise and Thrive Academy.
Okay, fantastic. That's super helpful. And do you work with people only locally in Melbourne, or do
It's
you
a
work with anybody?
global.
Okay.
No, it's a global organization. So
Mhm.
it's everything's been moved online now, obviously. And this is
Mhm.
once again, it's a
Mhm.
blessing, because when this all took place, I had to cancel events. I had to cancel,
Mhm.
some of my speaking gigs. And basically, we've had to move everything online. It was blended learning,
Mhm.
but it is all online. So it is a global
Okay.
program, and it's open to everybody.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure I put a link in the show notes. So I'll
Thank you.
put a link to your website. And I definitely want to put a link to your blog, because I loved your blogs about shadow and how important it is to lean into the shadow.
Thank you.
So important. And Catherine, it really has been an honor to have you here today. So much rich, juicy information that we talked about. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I've got goosebumps, and it's been such an honor to be on your show. And it's so nice to have a soulful conversation with like-minded individuals. So thank you so very much for everything and your time, your energy today. It's been awesome.
You're welcome. And before we sign off, do you have any final tips or bits of wisdom to leave with our listeners today?
I think the best thing that you can do is to spend time with self. I think that's for all of us to create. We are all in this together, and it's about what do we do with it. And I think that it's a calling to go within. So I think for all of us, for those that don't journal, don't meditate, or practice mindfulness, let's stop resisting what's going on. Let's just go within and take control of what you can control.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And thank you to our listeners. I hope you'll subscribe. I hope you'll share this. I think there's a lot of valuable information today that can help people. And if anybody is curious or wants to know more, you can reach out to me, or you can reach out to Catherine. Her links are going to be in the show notes. And I will see all of you next week on our next episode of Yes And. Have a fantastic day.
We have just concluded another episode of the Yes And podcast with Jennifer Whitacre. For additional resources, please visit our website, jenniferwhitacre.com. Leave a review if you enjoyed the show and find it useful. Until next time, continue challenging conventional thinking and keep moving forward.